I was just looking at my watch. I think 12 years ago, at this moment, maybe an hour ago, had found out that my brother was the pilot of the plane that was hijacked and crashed at the Pentagon. Before that, I had gotten a call at about 6:30 in the morning. I was in Los Angeles from my sister-in-law, not the pilot brother's wife, another brother, saying, "Deborah, go look at the television. Something terrible has happened." And like all of you, putting on the sets, seeing at that point the second plane had crashed into the South Tower, and I knew that we were at war right then and there. They were showing that video over and over and over again, Flight 175 hitting the South Tower, and I remember thinking about the pilot's family, how the pilots are in the flight deck and nosed into the plane, and I was thinking what a terrible thing for the families of the pilot to have to live with that video for the rest of their lives, not knowing that right about that moment, my brother was fighting for his life in his cockpit somewhere over the Ohio-Kentucky border. Until I learned that information, I was just like every other American, shocked and horrified in this surreal circumstance. I had lived in New York City for almost 30 years. I raised my daughter there, and this was my hometown. I was watching being attacked. And I'm giving you a little bit of background so you know what my orientation has been to this. It started out just as an ordinary citizen wanting to find out what happened to my brother. You know, he was a fighter pilot. He was a Top Gun, elite carrier-based, volunteered for the Gulf War. He was a squared-away guy who wouldn't have allowed something like this to happen to his airplane. So I spent a great deal of time trying to figure out the details, and I was not satisfied with reading the newspapers. So that meant researching primary sources and digging into primary material. I then moved from that to National Security Infrastructure, the 9/11 Commission, which was something of in some ways, a political sideshow, but they did some good things. And they did some bad things, which we can talk about later, but I was involved in all of the national security infrastructure, Patriot Act, terror surveillance, reforming the intelligence agencies, etc. That was a key aspect. Never let this happen again. I've changed again. I just participated in a discussion about terrorism in a post-Bin Laden world. Terrorism, my focus now is really not on the infrastructure, although there has to be eternal vigilance there. Now the focus is getting our government and the American public to focus on who the enemy is and defining that enemy. It hasn't been done. In 12 years, it hasn't been done. And I know Stephen has made his career now defining that enemy and getting in a lot of trouble for it, I might add. But that is the focus for me now, because a year ago, I was just at the Pentagon. President Obama was there, his chairman of Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, Secretary of Defense Hagel. And of course, his speech this year was not as political as it was last year. It was mostly about recovering in resiliency. But last year, I remember it very vividly, on September 11th, he said that Bin Laden or Al-Qaeda had been decimated and Bin Laden would never threaten us again. That was just, I would say, maybe 5 hours before our embassy was attacked in Egypt, in Cairo, and then of course Benghazi, dead Americans. And to this day, we do not have a government who has told the American people who they are, their affiliation with Al-Qaeda, the Liberation Islamic Fighting Group, pledged bayat to Al-Qaeda in 2007. One of the activists on the ground in Cairo was Mohammed al-Zawahiri, the brother of Ayman al-Zawahiri, now the #1 man in Al-Qaeda. And so the enemy has morphed, and we still have a leadership that talks about terrorism and extremism. But just in May, the president gave a speech at the National Security University. He talked about terror and terrorism and extremism, mentioning Nidal Hassan in the same breath as Tim McVeigh, as if Tim McVeigh was somehow a transnational, or belonged to a group that continues to be a transnational existential threat to this country. So that is a big problem, and I really feel at this point that we need to start shaming the press. We really need to start telling the press, give me a 1 minute warning, Sarah. We need to start demanding that the press report the truth. And I'll give you one example of what I feel is a terrible problem. When the Ground Zero Mosque controversy erupted in early 2010, for those of you who don't know what that was, it was a 15-story, a huge Islamic center that was going to be built literally across the street from where body parts were collected, in a building that had been destroyed by 2 of the large airplane parts from Flight 175. The landing gear literally crashed through the roof and through several floors, condemning the building. In other words, this building was no ordinary building, and it was on no ordinary place, and it was going to be erected for a project overseen by an imam who is a Sharia-embracing imam who believes that the First Amendment should be curtailed to show respect for Islam, and that Muhammad was a feminist. Yeah. So we basically went to war over that, not because we didn't think Muslims should have the right to build mosques anywhere in America, but we didn't want them to build it there, because we knew it would become radicalized, and we knew that it would serve as a symbol of conquest everywhere in the jihadi world, and we weren't going to let that happen. But getting back to the press coverage of this story was disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. I actually sat and spent an hour, almost 2 hours, with the developers of that project, Sharif Al-Gabal and his brother, and one of his other partners. And they were honest with us about what they were going to do. None of that made it into the press. I got a call from Lisa Miller, who was the director, or she was the head of religion at, I think, Newsweek. She was the senior editor of the religion section at Newsweek. And she said, would you talk to me about this? And I said, Lisa, I will if you can answer 2 questions for me. What is Sharia, and who are the Muslim Brotherhood? If you can answer those correctly, I'll give you a huge interview. She did. She answered them correctly, and we proceeded to talk for over an hour about Sharia and the Muslim Brotherhood. I thought, wow, we're going to make some headway here, because I was able to connect Imam Rauf to the Muslim Brotherhood operations and a Sharia project that he has, a global Sharia project. The article that she published was, I don't know if it was her magazine, if it was Time, but it was basically an Islamophobe angle. And her story pitted a firefighter's mother, a firefighter who had died in the World Trade Center, a probationary firefighter, and another mother of another firefighter's son. And one was for the mosque and one was against it. It was entirely an emotional piece. Just emotional. It didn't get into any of the substance of who these developers were, what they planned, what their connections were, and why we actually objected to it. That is the kind of thing that we can no longer allow the press to get away with. We have to start calling them out and shaming them, frankly. So I will just conclude by saying, because I don't want to, you didn't give me 1 minute, but I feel like I've been here a while. I really believe that we need to have a grassroots, ground-up movement, because our leaders aren't going to do this, where we refuse to be called Islamophobes anymore. That is a tactic to get us to be quiet. It has no bearing in reality. And we have to demand, we have to out our leaders who do not tell us the truth. And I think we have to recognize that Islam is a difficult subject. And I think we have to recognize that there's nothing shameful about vetting Muslims, in my opinion, because they have to vet each other. There are Muslims in this country who want to live secular lives, who want to embrace a pious form of Sharia and nothing more. We have to encourage those Muslims. We have to help them speak out, because they're being hurt as well. We must not allow ourselves to be called haters, because in fact, those Muslims who come here and who buy the American project, liberty, individual conscience, freedom of religion, they're being hurt. They're being hurt. Those are the people that we can stand with, and they're small. They're small in number, but they do exist. So I'm going to leave the floor to the expert here, and I will welcome your questions later.